I used to live in a quiet, 3-story walk-up on the edge of the city. It was the kind of building where the floors creaked even if you stood still, and the mailboxes hadn't been labeled properly in years. No one bothered each other much. A nod in the hallway was usually the full extent of interaction. My unit was on the second floor, middle apartment, the one with the broken heater valve and windows that stuck halfway when you tried to open them. The kind of place you stay in not because you love it, but because it's cheap and close to your job. I started noticing the notes in early October. The first one was tucked beneath my windshield wiper, written in blue pen on torn graph paper. I assumed it was a ticket or a badly written ad. It wasn't. You shouldn't leave your blinds open when you change. No name, no signature, just that one sentence centered and oddly neat. I looked around the lot, 2 cars on either side, both covered in a light film of dust, no cameras, no people. I brought the note upstairs, crumpled it and tossed it without a second thought. Figured it was a prank. Maybe a bored teenager from the building next door. The kind of thing you forget by dinner. But they kept coming, every 3 or 4 days, like clockwork, folded the same way. Different paper each time, lined notebook, printer paper, once even a napkin. But the message never changed. Always a variation of the same warning. Close your blinds. Or, you don't know who's watching. I started checking my windows every time I came home. I already kept the blinds down at night, out of habit. During the day, I sometimes left them open. Nothing scandalous, just regular stuff. Cooking, laundry, answering emails in my underwear. Things you'd never think twice about in your own home. I stopped leaving them open altogether after the 5th note. It was left on my doormat this time, folded tight, sealed with a piece of Scotch tape. A single line written in red ink. I can see your bathroom mirror from here. The paper smelled faintly like cigarettes. I stood in the hallway a while, staring at the door across from mine. Apartment 2, C. No one had lived there since I moved in 6 months ago. The mailbox was always empty. The windows looked dark every time I passed outside. I just assumed it was vacant. But someone had slid that note under my door from the hallway. That narrowed it down to 5 apartments. I left a small sticker on my doorframe the next day. Just a sliver of duct tape tucked behind the hinge where no one would see it unless they were looking. I wanted to know if someone opened my door when I wasn't home. I also started locking the bathroom door behind me, even when I was alone. 3 nights later, a new note appeared. Not on the windshield, not on the doormat. It was inside the fridge. You're getting paranoid. I threw out all the food, bought new locks, had a locksmith install them in front of me, 2 bolts and a chain. I even moved the couch in front of the door when I slept. But it didn't stop. Now the messages appeared on my phone. Texts from a number with no name, no ID. Short lines, still polite. You looked tired today. That shirt doesn't suit you. The apartment upstairs must be noisy. I filed a police report. The officer barely looked up from his desk. He said to change my number, talk to the landlord, maybe install a camera. The usual script. I knew it wouldn't help. I put up a camera facing my front door, another one inside the living room. Both were battery-powered and linked to my phone. I kept them running all night. 2 days passed with nothing. Then I came home to find the cameras turned off, batteries removed and neatly stacked on the kitchen table. No note this time. Just my toothbrush, moved from the cup to the floor. Nothing else out of place. That night, I slept in my shoes. I didn't leave my apartment the next day. Called in sick. Sat on the floor with a hammer beside me and every light in the apartment turned on. I kept checking the peephole every 10 minutes. Nothing moved. In the afternoon, I unplugged the TV and turned it around to face the wall. Around 4 p.m., I opened the window just slightly and watched the street. Cars passed, a dog walker, a guy in a bright orange vest repainting a curb. And in the building across from mine, 3rd floor, a man stood behind a half-open curtain, holding binoculars. I didn't move. I just watched him watching. He didn't flinch when I pulled out my phone and took a photo. Didn't lower the binoculars, just stared, steady and still. I called the landlord immediately, asked him who lived in 3B across the street. He told me that building wasn't part of his property. He didn't know anyone who lived there. I thought about calling the police again. I didn't. What would I say? Man with binoculars looked at me. I kept the blinds shut after that. Not just in the bathroom, every room. I stopped turning the lights on at night, walked around with a flashlight, slept under a blanket draped over 2 chairs, avoided the windows altogether. No more notes, no more texts, just quiet. That lasted a week. Then I found a flash drive taped to the inside of my freezer door. No note, no label. Just wedged behind the ice tray, sealed in a plastic bag. I used an old laptop with no internet connection, plugged it in. The drive had one folder, named after my address. Inside were videos. Dozens, each labeled by date and time. The footage was from inside my apartment, from angles I didn't recognize, top corners of the bedroom, behind the bookshelf, under the kitchen counter. Grainy, still, silent. I clicked through them one by one. In every clip, I was there. Moving, eating, pacing, sleeping. Always alone. Always watched. One file was dated the day before, 3:12 a.m. It showed me sleeping on the couch. The front door opened slowly. A figure stepped in, hooded, gloved, carrying something in their left hand. They didn't look at the camera, just walked up to the couch, stood over me for 28 seconds, then walked back out, closing the door softly behind them. The battery on the camera must have died minutes later. That clip was the last one. I packed everything I owned in 3 hours, called a friend 2 states away and asked if I could stay. Took only what I could fit in 2 bags, left the key on the table, and walked out. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw something taped to the outside of my door. Folded, blue pen, torn graph paper. Next time, knock first. The first time I saw her, she was standing in the stairwell with a piece of chicken in her hand, crouched like she expected something to leap out of the darkness. She had short brown hair and wore rubber gloves, even though it wasn't cold. A pile of canned food was balanced on the step beside her. She looked up quickly and asked if I'd seen a black cat around the building. Said it had a white stripe under its chin, answered to Toby, and hadn't come home the night before. I told her I hadn't. She nodded, still scanning the landing. I kept going. Her name was Olivia, apartment 1D. I passed her 2 more times that week, always carrying a flashlight even during the day. She taped flyers to the lobby glass, her phone number printed large with reward circled at the bottom. The photo was blurry, probably taken mid-step. The cat's eyes were wide, one ear bent back. I didn't think about it again until the following Tuesday. That's when I found it. Our mailbox setup was the old metal kind. 12 rusting doors, all horizontal, padlocked by default, unless you bought a cylinder key. Most people left them open anyway. I had to jiggle mine every time just to get it to latch. I was coming back from work, checking for a package slip. My box was empty. The one above it, labeled 1C, had its padlock missing and the door ajar. That's when I saw the fur. Black, patchy, and clumped. It was curled tightly inside the metal cubby. No collar. The stomach had been shaved clean, the skin pulled taut. The limbs were rigid and pressed inward as if folded. I didn't touch it. I didn't even lean closer. I shut the door. I looked at the name again, 1C. That was Jacob's unit. The guy with the old stereo and the hammering sounds late at night. I went upstairs, locked my door, and stayed inside until morning. I didn't report it. Not then. 2 days later, Olivia knocked again. She looked more tired this time. No gloves, just a key looped around her finger and a stack of new flyers in her hand. "I don't want to bother you," she said, "but I'm checking again. Some of the neighbors said Toby used to sit near your windowsill." I told her no, still hadn't seen him. She nodded. Her eyes lingered past my shoulder, toward the hallway behind me. "If you do," she said, "don't pick him up. He gets scared if he doesn't come to you first." I told her I'd remember. She handed me a flyer and left. The tape on her wrist was peeling, showing a yellow bruise. I looked at the paper again. It was the same photo. I dropped it in the trash as soon as I closed the door. Later that night, I walked back down to the lobby. The box labeled 1C was still closed. Someone had wedged a new lock through the latch, different color. Not standard issue. I didn't open it. Instead, I went home and opened my laptop. The building's tenant list was printed in the lease packet. I scrolled until I found Jacob's full name. Then, I ran a quick search. No social media, no business listing. One result from 6 years ago. An archived post on a classifieds forum, looking for pet sitting work. No photo. Just a phone number that didn't work anymore. The next day, I called the property manager and asked if there had been any complaints about him. She said she couldn't discuss other tenants. I asked if mailboxes were ever cleaned or checked. She said residents were responsible for their own. I didn't mention what I saw. That weekend, I stayed home, watched the hallway from the peephole. I saw Jacob leave twice, each time with a backpack and a bag of recyclables, each time wearing gloves. On Sunday, I followed him down. He walked out to the dumpster and stood behind it for a long time. Then he dropped something into the recycling bin and walked back inside without looking up. I waited a few minutes, then went down myself. The bag was filled with empty bottles, a newspaper, and a tin of pet food. The can was unopened. The expiration date had been scratched off. I put it back and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how small the mailbox was, how tightly the body had been curled, the missing fur, the shaved line along the stomach. I didn't want to know what had happened, but I also couldn't leave it alone. I went back down with gloves and a flashlight. The lock on 1C was gone again. The door hung slightly open. Inside was a new towel folded neatly, and a small blue bowl. Empty. I didn't touch anything. I closed the door and stepped away. As I turned to go back upstairs, Jacob came out of the stairwell. We made eye contact. He didn't smile. He looked down at my gloves, then at the mailbox behind me. Then he kept walking. He didn't say anything. I moved out 12 days later, paid the penalty, left the keys on the counter, told the next tenant to get a new lock for the mailbox just in case. They asked why. I said I didn't get much mail. I moved into apartment 207 because it was cheap, not because I liked it. The kind of unit that smelled like old plaster and reheated food, with light switches that clicked twice before working, and a shower head that hissed when you turned the cold tap. The fridge leaned forward slightly and the ceiling had a faint yellow stain above the bed, like something old had dried there, and no one had thought to paint over it. But the rent was stable, and I worked nights. I didn't need much, just a door that locked and a bathroom that drained. A week after moving in, I started hearing a noise through the wall I shared with 206. Not music, not a TV. A long, steady scraping. It always started in the early afternoon, about 2:30, and lasted maybe 15 minutes, never longer, never earlier. I figured someone was sanding down shelves or cleaning up something. Maybe the wall had uneven plaster. Maybe they were repainting. That seemed like the kind of thing people did in an old place like this. When it kept happening, I knocked once, just out of curiosity. No answer. The hallway was quiet. I never saw anyone go in or out of 206. The blinds were always closed. The doormat was clean and flat, but not new, like it had been vacuumed. I kept hearing the sound, same rhythm, same duration. A few days later, I pressed my ear to the wall. It wasn't sanding. The pace was slower, more deliberate. Each pass scraped across the wall with a pause at the end. Then again, like someone dragging something sharp across drywall, stopping and starting again. Not mechanical. Manual. When I asked the building manager, she looked down at her clipboard and said 206 was vacant. No one had picked up the keys since December. The last tenant left most of their stuff and hadn't come back. I didn't know how to follow that. A few days later, I moved a shelf to vacuum behind it. Dust had gathered along the baseboard, and I'd been putting it off. That's when I saw the hole. It was small, about the size of a coin, drilled cleanly through the wall at knee height. The edge was neat, but the drywall around it was smudged, like someone had touched it recently. I leaned in and looked. Just darkness. No light from the other side. No draft. No sound. I covered the hole with masking tape and pushed the shelf back. The next afternoon, the noise returned. Same time, but louder now, and lower. It seemed closer to the baseboard, not the center of the wall, like before. I peeled back the tape the next day. The hole was still there, but now there was a second one. Just a few inches to the right. This one was rougher, not drilled, more like someone had punched through the wall with something pointed and chipped at the edges. I patched both holes with wall, filler, and a thin layer of paint left by the previous tenant. The label said eggshell white, but it dried a little darker. I tried to ignore it. Then I started hearing breathing. Not snoring, not speech, just breathe. Soft, rhythmic exhalations. No sharp inhale, no cough, just air moving in and out, steady and slow. I listened for a long time, head against the wall. Every few seconds the breath paused, then resumed. And then the scraping came back. I didn't sleep there that night. The next morning I went to the manager again. She seemed more alert this time. I told her about the noise, the holes, the breathing. She nodded slowly and said, she'd walk down with me. She unlocked 206 with a key from a ring that had 12 other tags. The door creaked. The air inside was stale, with that fabric and laundry smell old apartments get when they're closed up too long. Everything was still there. Couch, unmade bed, a side table with a burned-out lamp, a pile of books stacked directly on the floor. No electronics, no signs of recent use. No food or garbage, just dust. And something else. On the shared wall, the one opposite mine, were 7 holes. All small. Some drilled, some gouged, a few plugged with cotton, one stuffed with a piece of paper towel, all about head or knee height, lined up in a loose grid. The manager said nothing. I asked who had access to this unit. She looked at the holes for a while, then said, "No one should." We left. She locked the door behind us. Back in my apartment, I moved the shelf away for good. There was a new hole, larger than the others. This one set higher, right at eye level. Not drilled this time. It had been carved wider, and the edges had frayed slightly, as if done with the edge of a tool. Inside the hole, I saw a smooth, glass dome. Not flat, rounded, convex like a lens. It reflected the light from my lamp, not like a mirror, like something curved. I didn't lean closer. I didn't touch it. That night, I packed everything I could fit into a suitcase and a duffel bag. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen until sunrise and called a moving service as soon as the office opened. I told them I needed the rest of my things picked up. No furniture, just boxes. I left the bookshelf behind. Didn't leave a note. Didn't leave a forwarding address. I haven't rented a place with shared walls since.